All right, we're ready to roll. Are you guys ready to roll? Okay. Welcome to the 2017 Moot Beit Din competition. Thank you to everyone who is joining us here today and watching via the live stream. Before we begin the competition, everyone please make sure your cell phones are off so that we do not interrupt the presentations. We are in the Brandeis 2 division. The teams competing in this division are Solomon Schechter High School of Long Island, Golda Ak Academy, Adelson Educational Campus, Yavne Academy, Herzliya High School, San Diego Jewish Academy, and Eula Girls High School. We'd like to thank our judges who are not only with us today, but have invested time and thought in reading and providing feedback to your written decisions. I'd like to invite the judges to each stand and introduce themselves to the room.
I'm Rabbi Laura Scheinkauf.
And I'm Irv Rotter.
The competition works as follows. Each team will have 8 minutes for presentation, and there will be 8 minutes for Q&A. Our timekeeper is Rabbi Baruch Rock. He will give each team a 1-minute warning and then a 30-second warning. Even if you are mid-sentence, you must stop. You do not need to use your full 8 minutes for presentation, and judges, you do not need to use your full 8 minutes for questions. There will be a 5-minute break between each team, and at the start of the break, the timekeeper will invite the next team to set up here on the stage. There will also be 2 longer breaks throughout the competition. After the final team has presented, there will be a lunch break, and the judges will deliberate, followed by a closing ceremony at 12:30 in Sam Houston. For those of you watching the live stream, to view the closing ceremony, go to the Prisma CJTS YouTube channel at 12:30. Thank you all. B'hatzlacha. The first team up is Solomon Schechter High School of Long Island.
Check.
When you present, one word please, try to be close to the microphone, maybe about this distance, maybe about 2 to 3 inches in general.
Okay. Today we are reviewing the case of Shimon Shalom versus Rachel Rubenstein. What is it about?
It's about some sort of car crash, but here Rachel comes now. Let's hear her case.
Help me, Moot Beit Din. You're my only hope. Last summer, I bought the Aliva, a self-driving car. One day, as I was listening to my music, a pedestrian jaywalked in front of the moving Aliva and caused it to T-bone into Mr. Shimon Shalom's car. I say it's Aliva Industries' fault because I had no input to react to my surroundings. If I had control of the car, I would have easily just pressed the brake myself.
Well, we first need to discuss how the self-driving car is defined under halakha.
Okay, so we know there are 4 types of damagers according to Bava Kama 1:1. There is the pit and the fire, which are not alive, and the ox and the chewer, which are alive.
I think the Aliva is an ox, because both the ox and the Aliva have intelligence, serve human beings, and can operate on their own.
But which type of ox? Shemot 21, 35-36 explains that there is a shor tam, which does not tend to cause damage, and the shor muad, which has a habit of causing damages.
Then it must be a short tom, since the Aliva is yet to gore thrice, which is the criteria set forth by Bava Kama 2:4 and Mishnah Torah Hilchot Nizkei Mamon 6:1.
I think the Aliva is a fire, since it is not actually alive. Also, Bava Kama 9b to 10a teaches that fires are capable of moving and causing damage uncontrollably, just like the Aliva.
Yeah, and my Aliva destroyed property and injured Mr. Shalom without my control.
Why not both? The Aliva can be both a shor tam and a fire.
But that doesn't make any sense. While the fire is muad and tends to damage, the short tom is not muad, does not tend to damage.
No, it does make sense. The car has to be an ox, since it can think for itself to a certain extent, but it has not gored 3 times. The car by itself is a short tom, but once turned on, it becomes a fire, which has a capability of causing damage.
So, since the Oliva is artificially alive and has the uncontrollable capability for causing damage, it can be defined between something not alive which causes damage and something alive which does not cause damage.
Precisely. The Oliva is a new category which combines a fire and the short tom.
So, if you're defining the car as an ox at a fire, what does that mean for me?
Well, since the car becomes a fire once the ignition is turned on, whoever turns it on assumes responsibility for any damages, even if they are caused beyond their control.
Yeah, in Bava Kama 22ab, Rava and Rabbi Yochanan teach that the act of lighting a fire incriminates the lighter, even if the fire spreads on its own.
Additionally, Rabbeinu Asher's response to 1015 teaches that any crash involving a horse would be the rider's fault, since the rider started the horse with the stirrup. Causing damage with an animal is like causing damage with your body. Likening the horse to the car, we learn that even if the Oliva did not require human input, it is still an extension of a human, since it required someone to turn the ignition.
You can start a fire, a horse, and a car. The Oliva's ignition is exactly like the stirrup.
In preparing for this case, I learned that Bava Kama 2.6 teaches that a person is always considered fully liable. So, am I liable for all damages?
Well, maybe not. Bava Kama 8.1-2 defines 5 categories of compensation we need to deal with. Nezek, damages, Tsa'ar, suffering, Ripui, medical expenses, Shevet, time away from work, and Boshet, embarrassment. But since you did not cause the accident directly, you are only partially liable and must only pay for Nezek.
Good point. Bava Kama 27a teaches that a man who falls off a roof due to an unexpected wind and causes damage to someone below is only responsible for nezek, since the wind was not foreseeable. In this case, the pedestrian is like the wind.
Also, Shemot 22.5 teaches that the person who starts a fire must only pay for damaged property. So Rachel only needs to pay for the physical damages to Mr. Shalom's car, and not to the damages to his body since he experienced a full recovery.
Hold up. Shemot 21:35-36 teaches that the owner of something muad is liable for full damages, but the owner of something not muad is only liable for paying half damages. But we define the Oliva as both a fire, which is muad, and a short tom, which is not muad.
So, how much nezek am I actually required to pay? All of it? Half of it?
I think it can resolve this difficulty. Can we confer for a moment?
Okay, we are resolved to split the difference. It would not be fair to Mr. Shalom if he would be left with 50% of nezek to pay, considering the Oliva is considered a fire. But it would also be unfair to Rachel if she would have to pay for 100% of nezek, considering the Oliva is also considered a short tom. So, Rachel, you need to pay 75% nezek, and Mr. Shalom needs to pay the other 25%.
What if Mr. Shalom's insurance company pays my share? Can they do that?
Well, Rabbi Moshe Sternbach explains in Shuvot Hanagot that if Mr. Shalom receives money from his insurance company, he is only receiving his own money back, which he deposited over time. Therefore, you are not exempt from paying Mr. Shalom back.
What if Mr. Shalom's insurance company wants to collect the money from me?
Sternbach says that there is no need for you to pay twice. You can pay to either the insurance company or to Mr. Shalom directly.
So now that we've discussed damages and liability, we have to think about the future.
What about it?
Well, to prevent this scenario from occurring again, should Oliva Industries change their code at all?
Yes, that is a good question. Well, this is the first time that any Oliva, specifically Rachel's, has crashed. And since it is not yet considered shor muad, the company isn't actually required to change the code at all, because the Oliva is still considered a non-habitual gorer.
But since the car can also be considered a fire, doesn't that mean that the company should change their code since their fire was not controlled?
To the contrary, Shulchan Aruch Hashem Mishpat 4:18-5 states that if a man properly safeguards his fire by putting the fire in their domain a safe distance away from their neighbor's yard, and an unexpected external wind still causes it to set a neighbor's yard on fire, then the man who lit the fire is exempt from liability.
So since Oliva Industries built the car with all the necessary precautions by coding it to minimize the risk of fatalities, Rachel is the outside force that caused it to go out of control.
Essentially, yes.
Interesting. In that case, does Pikuach Nefesh apply here as well?
Yes. The Oliva is coded to take the route that minimizes the risk of fatality. And in this case, the car determined that the safest way would be swerving, inadvertently, into Mr. Shalom's car. The code upholds the ideals of Pikuach Nefesh found in Leviticus 19:16 and Ketubot 19a.
So no halachic changes are absolutely necessary. But I think ethically, something must be changed just in case of an emergency.
I agree, but what?
Well, as I said, I could have just stopped the car myself if I had the ability. What if Oliva added a human override option?
Now that is a good idea.
Yeah, and with this, Ellie Levine will be able to provide a safer option for emergency situations. Now, can we summarize our findings?
Yes, today we determined that the self-driving Oliva car is both a fire and a short term.
And we also determined that Rachel Rubenstein is liable to pay 75% of Nezek, and Shimon Shalom is liable to pay 25% of Nezek. The other types of damages Mr. Shalom experienced are not required to be paid by anyone in particular. So it seems like Mr. Shalom and his insurance company will need to bear the brunt of the rest of the costs themselves.
Finally, the programming of the Oliva need not change since it already upholds the idea of Pikuach Nefesh. However, the car can be improved by adding additional human input options.
Basically, even though Rachel did not directly cause the crash, as a person who owns the car and who turned the ignition of the Oliva, it is her responsibility to control it.
Thank you. I would now like to let the panel question the Beit Din on their decision on my case.
Perhaps if the Bet Din would explain the reason why Rachel is considered to be the cause of the damage as opposed to the pedestrian?
Well, we explained that she is the person who turns the ignition of the car on, and the pedestrian is just the external force. With the case of an ox, with the case of a fire, well, especially with the case of a fire, in Baba Kama 22 A to B, Rava says that the person who lights a fire, even if it spreads on its own, is liable to pay for damages. So even though an external thing happens, because Rachel is the person who turns on the car, she is responsible for paying damages.
But if that's the reasoning, then why isn't it the creator of the car? In other words, what you have is the creator of the car creates the fire. Turning it on is a cause, but then the question is there an intervening cause? And was Rachel proximate cause for the damage, or was the pedestrian the proximate cause of the damage?
So another reason why it can't be the pedestrian is because the identity of the pedestrian is not known.
That raises actually a very interesting question, which is what I wanted to get to, and that is the role of the Beis Din to compensate the victim or to find justice for the people involved? If, in fact, you're viewing it as justice for the victim, then you're looking to find someone liable. There is a possibility of saying that the pedestrian is liable, and unfortunately Mr. Shalom is unable to collect because the pedestrian is unknown and has disappeared.
Going back to the part why can't it be the insurance company, because of they were also an external force of sorts. We mentioned that in Shulchan Aruch Hashem Mishpat 4:18 2-5, that if a man properly safeguards his fire, in this case puts it in their property a safe distance away from their neighbor's yard, and an external force still causes it to set fire, he is exempt from liability. The reason of this is because the reason if a fire breaks loose and causes damage is assumed that the Shulchan Aruch says that it's their fault because they didn't properly safeguard the fire, they didn't build the fire themselves. But if they properly made a safe distance and it still happened, then it's out of their control, and they did all the precautions that they can to make sure it's safe. In this case, Mr. Levine coded the car to be as safe as possible, to save as many lives as possible, pikuach nefesh. So he took all the precautions necessary.
But then why is Rachel liable? Because didn't she use the same safeguards?
So I think the way that we looked at it was that the car in and of itself has all the precautions necessary. However, once Rachel turned on the ignition of the car, she basically assumes responsibility for anything it does. While the car stopped and it's like in a parking lot, not doing anything, is perfectly safe. But once Rachel comes into the picture and she turns it on, then she's assuming responsibility for anything it might do, while she's on the road with it.
And we
So-
also want to remember, Bava comma 27A, which explains that if somebody takes those necessary precautions, even if something unexpected happens, they are still liable to pay, but they are only liable to pay for nezek and not for the other 4 types of damages.
Let me be clear. Is the Besdin then saying that there is strict liability here? In other words, the minute you turn on that car, it becomes strict liability regardless of what happens, regardless of what other actions take place? So that, for example, if that's the case, then let us assume for the moment Mr. Shalom's car had swerved into the lane and the programming was such that it tried to swerve out of the way. Would Rachel still be liable?
Just to clarify, you said that Mr. Shalom's car?
Yes, if
swerved?
Mr. Shalom's car had swerved into her lane, she tried to get out of the way, and he is then hurt. Is there strict liability because of the fact that she didn't get out of the way?
Considering the fact that he was the one who caused the actual crash because he was the person who swerved in the way, then she would not be liable for the damage.
Then why
And
is
I
it any
think-
different if the pedestrian caused it?
Because we cannot find the pedestrian to extract damages. It's also different in this case because Rachel is directly involved in the crash. And going back to your other thing about what if Mr. Shalom swerved in the car, for that I think we should look at Baba comma 35, that's source number 5 if you have the packet, which explains the case of the jug owner and the beam owner, and basically says that whoever does a thing which is out of the ordinary is liable to pay. So in that case that you just mentioned, Mr. Shalom did the thing which is out of the ordinary.
It's interesting. Let me ask one last question, and I'll turn it over to you. And that is, why is this different than the Stadium Ox? In the sense that she bought a car that basically had certain programming attached to it, which is, as you say, designed to protect. But if in fact there's something that is inherent in the nature of the item, that it's the programmer and not the owner who is ultimately liable.
Could you please clarify your question?
Sure. If you look at the source material on the Stadium Ox,
Yeah.
Right.
Stadium Ox, the person who purchases a Stadium Ox is not held liable, correct?
Well, I would.
That's the Mishnah. Mishnah says that
You all-
that the person who purchases it is not liable. So now the question then becomes, if that person isn't liable, why isn't Rachel in the position of having purchased a Stadium Ox?
I'd actually disagree with that premise that the Baba comma 44 says that the owner of the Stadium Ox isn't liable. It actually says Eno chayav mita, so that means that the Stadium Ox is not liable to be killed in this case.
Yeah, but
So it
the
doesn't
Gemara,
actually
the Gemara
mention
the Gemara goes on and
the
says he's
owner.
potter.
Oh, sorry, we don't have that here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
We also categorize the Oliva as a short tom. So we don't even consider it as a Stadium Ox.
But why would it be a tom? In other words, how does the programming indicate that it's a muad or not? And especially given the fact that you're saying that it is a cross between a shor and aish. So why do you make that distinction as well in terms of the changing of the programming?
You also have to remember that a Stadium Ox is trained to kill, but the Oliva is trained to save lives.
It's trained to do well. Actually, the Oliva is trained to go from place to place.
The code is specifically coded to save as many lives as possible.
In going from place to place.
And going from
Yes,
place to
right.
place. That's yeah, exactly.
I think that
Yeah.
the reason, okay.
I don't
Go
want.
ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that
'Cause we're
the
gonna run out of
reason we
time.
justify this as a simple ox and not a dangerous ox, which is what you are constituting as a stadium ox, is because it is, like my teammate said, it is a simple ox and it has not yet gored 3 times. And because we know that it is trained to avoid conflict because that's the reason the whole crash happened in the first place. Had it not been programmed to provide as safe a ride as possible for the driver, then it would have just went right into the pedestrian. However, it was programmed to avoid this.
Thank you, guys.